questions about what I talked about so far?
Back just a little bit. How did you initially prepare your beds? Did you do that all with
Yeah, shovel. Yeah, there's 180 of them. And so you know, I was motivated. I was highly motivated. I was buying a farm. This is great. But I also knew that I would do it only once. So that got me stimulated. If I were to do this every year, I'd be like, no, this is not going to fly. So the biointensive principle. You know, again, it's not a dogma and it's not a philosophy. It's just an approach. And basically, it came out of the fact that we didn't have the tractor. Because in a typical tractor setup, you have rows. And the spacing between the rows is determined by your weeding implement that you're pulling on the tractor. Okay? So that setup has two logical consequences to it. The first one is that you're spreading out. And the other one is that you have a lot of soil that is bare and exposed. And there's serious drawbacks to that. So you might be really efficient in a way because you're driving your tractor really fast, but you have a lot more ground to cover. In an intensive systems, you're bringing everything as close to possible because you want to maximize yields. And when you do that, you get certain advantages. And one of the principles that we followed when we started this on 30-inch beds was to figure out how many rows, the spacing on the rows of all of our vegetables, and we wanted the leaves of the crops to touch one another at 3/4 of their growth. So that's how we got started into this. And when you do this, you get the crop to quickly form a canopy. And the canopy has many functions to it. The first one is that it shades out the weeds. So, you know, once this is established, you're not weeding the crops anymore. And it's also retaining all the moisture. Because the soil is not exposed, it's covered. And when you do that, this is good for the crop, but also for all of the microorganisms that are working in the soil. That's the environment that they want. So the canopy, and it kind of creates a microclimate, something that is really cool. But to get the canopy, you need to have really good soil structure because you're spacing crops really close to one another. In a typical setup, you work your soil. When you work your soil, there's layers that get formed. Not hard pans necessarily, but layers. And then the roots of the crops, when they're going down, and you know, they hit these layers and then they start to go sideways. And then if your crops are closely spaced, they'll compete for water, for nutrients, and you'll get poor yields or poor quality. If you have really, really good soil that has good soil depth and good soil structure, ideally you want to have just like one big layer. You can have the roots of the crops really shoot down low. And then you can really space everything and get the benefit of the canopy. Okay? So this is like the 101 of biointensive, and I was reading about this in gardening books. And I was understanding how it makes a lot of sense. But then the question is, can you take this and bring that to a commercial scale and make a living at this? And that was the bet that we took when we started the farm. And this idea of building up soil and having great soil structure, all of the tools and aprils and all of the technique that we've developed or incorporated into our system, they were designed to match that principle. We're building soil, we're keeping the structure of the soil as, you know, full on as possible.
Did you double dip?
No. And it'll become clear to you why we don't.
What was the question?
If we double dig. Okay? So root systems, they tell a lot about your soil structure. And you know, there's this common misconception that soil is soil. You have good soil, JM, probably because this works well. No, soil is just as good as the grower that is working with the soil. And soil, they can change. You can add so much organic matter. You can play with the soil to kind of make it happen. And that's why I think small scale it's like you need that if it's going to happen. So you can do soil profiles and you can quickly see if the way you're working your soil works with the root system. So these are pictures of our crops on the farm. So you see that the canopy quickly takes over. So it's like if our crop is a cover crop. And again, there's a lot of benefits to that. There's more yields, but also it shades out the weeds, and it just retains the moisture. And it keeps the soil alive because it's not exposed or bare most of the time when it reaches the canopy. So, Smodelen, she's picking beans. She's laughing. I don't know why. Picking beans is so much work.
Dan,
Yeah.
do you have problems with fungal
Air circulation because everything is.
or pests?
This is the question that I get asked all the time. Do you get fungi problem because everything is close? And the answer to this is no, not really. I don't. Why? Well, that's the other question. Why? Is it because this is magical? We have fairies that are coming. And I'm not an agronomist, so it's hard for me to give you an answer straight out. My understanding of this is that soils, they have life in them, bacteria or fungi, and if it's colonized with good bacteria, there's no room for bad ones to come in. And so to create an environment where the soil is rich, it needs to be covered. Exposed, bare soil is an invitation for anyone to jump in, because when it's exposed and bare, it doesn't fly with the microorganisms in the soil. It's like an open wound. Okay? And we also, you'll see, we put a lot of compost that is really high in microbial life. And so that's my explanation, but that doesn't mean that I'm right. But I hadn't had any problems in like 13 years that I've been doing this. And so I've had a little of mildew, but if I have mildew and I've done that experiment, like I have these lettuce heads that are really close and I have mildew. So I said, okay, I'll go and do lettuces that are spread apart further out, and I still have mildew. So pictures of the crops. This guy has a tree planting bag, so you're working with both of your hands. This is really critical. So a different kind of setup that what people are used to see, but there's a lot of production per square feet. These are ground cherries, and so this is the kind of setup that we're working with. 30-inch, 18-inch, high yields. We're doing density because we want to get the canopy also. And there's a lot of benefits that are built into that way of doing things. And that picture illustrates that. You're covering carrots with row cover in the spring or in the fall, or in an insect net because of rust flies in the summer. If you're your row cover, you're doing 5 rows of carrots on 30-inch compared to 5 rows on 5 or 6 feet to accommodate the tractor. Well, it's going to take you, 1/5 of the row cover to do the same job. So you'll need 1/5 of the material. It's going to cost you 5 times less material to do the exact same thing. But most importantly, it's going to go 5 times faster to cover your crops. And a gain of 5 is huge. Like instead of taking 5 hours, it's 1 hour. You need to see it like that. Or instead of taking 45, it's going to take you 15 or 10. So that built up, that design principle is the same when you're scouting for insects, when you're harvesting, when you're watering, and it just makes you more effective. And that's a hard sell for people because they they're thinking, yeah, this is pretty interesting, but I'm still thinking that with my tractor, it's faster. And my thing with tractors is not to say that they're good or bad, because I really love tractors, actually. And I'd like to have one someday. But when you're starting a farm, if you're doing, a CSA of 100 member, or 150, or even 200, it's just, perhaps it's not the right tool for that kind of scale. Tractors are great when you have a crew of 6 or 7 or 10 or 15 employees, and then you're moving a lot of produce, and you're organized in a way where you have warehouses, and you have a crew, but if you're starting small, and if you're doing, again, like less than $200,000 in sales, these are interesting concepts to look at. Okay? Yes. Yeah, because we wanted to have bigger carrots. We do 12 rows in the spring and in the fall. And we do baby carrots, then we use 12 rows. So we're covering on our farm, and it's probably the same here because of our climate, the whole farm is under row cover. So, the fact that we're using 1/5 of it makes a difference. We're watering, again, that's another key point. If you're watering bare soil, exposed soil, I'm not sure it's the most, it's the better use of water, but also, setting up a line takes time. So if you're watering 5 times more crops with one line, there's a gain there. All of this didn't just spring up in my mind. It was because at one point after we were in our 4th season and we were doing pretty well on the farm, I've been asked by Equitaire, they're the CSA the big CSA network in Quebec. There's 140 farms, 15,000 eaters, part of that network, self-funded. And they've asked me to become a mentor for farmers that were starting out. And so I would visit farms, and what I would see is that in July, you couldn't find the crops. You're kind of looking for them in the fields because of the weeds. And we would visit and consult together, and it was always the same thing. It was like, well, we're working super hard, long hours, and I would see that the quality was sometimes there, sometimes it wasn't. At the end of the fields were pretty dirty. At the end of the year, it was, people were selling Christmas trees down New York. Not sure if they would do it again because they were burned out. And on my farm, it was like, well, fields were clean. I was having a good time. I was making money. I was traveling in the winter. And then I was like, well, is it because I'm an amazing farmer? Is it because I'm so good? And it was tempting to think that. It really was, because, our egos. But it got me thinking about, I think that what we're doing is so different that it's giving different results. And that's when I started to think more about what we were doing. And that was the click was like, yeah, perhaps I should start to write about what we're doing and think about, because, as growers, farmers, we're doing stuff, and sometimes we don't even know why we're doing it that way. But if you stop and think about it, there's sometimes a lot of principles that are built into why we do things in a certain way. So that was like the start, and that's when I realized that whole row cover thing. It just made a lot more sense for me, at least. So these are typical spacings on our farm on 30-inch bed, and for a lot of people, especially in France, this was a hard sell for them. This shouldn't work. This is too close. There's problems with that. This is not the way it should be done. And it's funny because when I was researching this, I got to talk a lot to Elliot Coleman about what he was doing, because I was kind of copying his thing. And at one point he sent me that picture that was to come out in his Winter Harvest book. And that picture was taken in a small farm in France of a farmer that was farming like his grandfather was farming on 2 acres. And that was a farm that Elliot Coleman visited in the early 70s. And that was the influence of his work. And it was permanent beds, really close spacings, quality everywhere, like quality. It was a biodynamic farm. And it was like, for me, it was like kind of the proof that what we were doing is not crazy at all. It's just common sense. And pretty much everyone might be, and I've done the research, everyone was growing like that before the 40s. That was a typical farming system. Intensive spacings, close row. And why was it like that? Because there weren't any tractors. Okay? So you get these close rows, you'll cultivate the soil once or twice, and then the cover crop takes over. It's the same, you guys are in the same boat that I am. We're using row covers in the spring and fall, and we're using nets in the summer because of all the insect problems. So it ends up being that we're cover farming. And so even my friends that are, I'm the only one of the gang that is not mechanized. They've all scaled up a lot. And now, like after 10 years, they're like, JM, your thing is not so crazy because we're covering a lot of the crops and we're using hoops. And when you're using hoops and covers and then you want to go and cultivate with the tractor, you need to remove the covers and the hoops. So it's kind of crazy. So they're cultivating with hose anyway. So it was like, well, if you're cultivating with hose anyway, why not use closed spacings to maximize the reach of your workers and to maximize your yields? And they're highly interested in that. But then I tell them, well, if this is going to fly, you need to change your whole system not to work your soil. And so that's a challenge. That's a big challenge to them. They're like, oh, I'm not sure about that. But, each his own. So 5 rows of carrots on 30-inch, pumping out nice sized carrots. Carrots are a great indicator of if what you're doing with your depth and with your soil works. So the carrots, they're not perfect. They're crooked. I have, stones in my field. But we don't care because my client, what they want are Nantes carrots that are freshly harvested and that are super sweet. Crooked or not. So this is Modèle, picture of her. And, this picture reminds me of this. When my book came out in French, it got really popular, okay? As a sideline, it was number 2 in the best-selling list besides 50 Shades of Grey. For real. In Quebec, okay? The reason is, the publishers, they didn't think that book would fly, obviously, because it's a book about farming. So the first print was like, I think, 600. And when the book came out, there was a TV show on what we were doing that came out. So people rushed to the store to buy it. And then it was, after 3 days, there weren't any more copies. And it took a month for new prints to come back in the store. But then people kept going to the store and ordering the book and ordering the book and ordering. So it's back order, back order, back order. And then when it came out again, they sold so many books that week that it was number 2 besides 50 Shades of Grey. I should put a picture of that in the slideshow, but that was funny. And so that became hot, and then it became hot in France too because a lot of young growers, they want to do something like that. And then they have a strong community of agronomists over there. And they were kind of tired of hearing about these Canadians that were doing this. So they would call us and they would fly down. About 6 of them flew in 2 years to visit what we were doing. And all of them, it seemed they wanted to come down and tell us that what we were doing shouldn't work or couldn't work or was a bad idea. And there is always the same. They would come to the farm, and we would host them, quite friendly. And they would have this impression. It's like, whoa, this is it. We've heard so much about you guys, and because it's a micro farm, it's about the size of a soccer field, so it's tiny. And then they would know not to sell, they say it's small, because I would always kind of advertise grow bigger, grow better, not bigger, so they wouldn't say that, but they were like, well, this is a small farm. But when you walk the fields and you look, there's a lot of production happening. And that's what we've been aiming for. We wanted to find the balance between yields, between caliber of the crops, and quality, which is really what we're all about, quality. Because that's how we compete with my neighbor that are all mechanized. We try to have better quality than these guys. So this works. You can have really good root systems and a canopy, close spacings. I shouldn't have to convince people about this. There's enough evidence. It's just we've been doing this for 13 years. It works. It works. So before we take a break, I just wanted to show you certain examples of how our land constraint forced us to kind of optimize certain things. So we used to do onions in sets of 3, like that, 3 rows on 30-inch. And we changed our methods where we're transplanting the onions in clumps of 3. So what that does is that, first of all, it goes 3 times faster to transplant the onion, which is a nice gain. It's easier to cultivate between them, but there's also more yield per square foot. Leeks, same thing. Perhaps some of you guys have heard me tell that story, but it took us a lot of time to grow nice leeks because we didn't know what nice leeks were. And we would have complaints at market we have a lot of French people from France at our market, and there was one woman, she would always complain, your leeks, you guys are amateurs, you obviously don't know what you're doing. And she would go on and say, I feed your leeks to the pigs. So what's up, lady? We come here, we're all nice, and these are like our babies, and she was always complaining about the leeks. And then when we went to France, we understood why. Because in France, they only eat the white stem. The rest, they throw to the pigs, okay? And so the trick is to blanch them with soil as they grow. So on a 30-inch bed system, that means you have 2 rows because you need to have enough dirt to mount over the leeks. So we changed the way we were doing things. Instead of hilling them, we're burying them. So we have a dibbler, and we poke a hole, and then we drop the leeks inside the holes. And the length of the dibbler and the hole is the length of the white blanched stem. So basically, we went to that French woman once and, Madame, okay, we get it. How long do you want your leeks to be, Madame? We will customize it to your liking. And now she said 25 centimeters. And that's how we went from 2 rows to 3 rows, which is 100% more production on the same amount of space. So when you're covering with a tarp, you're covering more with the same tarp. You get it? So that was one example. And so, yeah, and then, I talk a lot about efficiency, and then this one guy came and said, you guys are making holes one at a time. They were laughing, so they built us a 3-hole puncher, dibbler, and 9 inches. So that's how we do it now. So, we have 8 beds of leeks. So that saves us about perhaps 6 or 7 hours of work. But that's in that day, that's a big difference for a tool that costs $100. So if you're doing this with leeks, you need to start them earlier so that they grow taller. You don't trim them anymore. You need to have more roots, so you have bigger flats. And then there you go. You need to have 1 inch popping out so that the leeks will survive.
Drop that hole, pretty much, you drop it way down in it.
Yeah, you drop it in, and then you don't fill it up.
Yeah.
So when the water will push it down gently, and after a week or 2, when you hoe or cultivate, then a little bit of dirt will get in, and as it grows, it'll fill up.
Do you trim the roots?
No, I don't trim the roots. I just and then put it in the hole. So I got cocky with this because of that lady. She really pushed my buttons. And so I was in this quest to grow like blanch stem like crazy out of this world. So now we do this, we bury them at 9-inch, and I cover them with straw another 6-inch, and we get leeks that are like, so now they don't laugh at my leeks anymore. So I'm happy. So this is great stuff. So I'm going to end this first period with that story, which made so much difference for our business. And it was when I visited, commercial organic greenhouse productions, and I realized that these guys were a lot more efficient than I was. So what I did is I replaced my 2 hoop houses that were 16 feet wide by one 32 feet greenhouse. So it's the same area, but just more light, more space, easier to heat. And we hired an agronomist to teach us how to prune, trim, how to graft the tomato plant so that you can grow tomatoes year after year after year. And, just learned a whole new set of skills that we didn't have before. And, it was a big learning curve, but that was great because we were paying somebody to teach us how to grow better. And it's just crazy. We went from, X amount of tomatoes to 25X tomatoes on the same space.
Can you just go back one slide so we can see the seeds? Oh, yes.
Yeah, these are just so that you don't need to. Usually in greenhouse, they have like elevators, but we're kind of low tech, so we use these. These are customized to our alleyways. And this is all simple stuff, but the growing practice, understanding how to calculate the number of fruits per clusters, how to measure and control humidity in the greenhouse, all of this is, this is something that is really important if this is going to happen. And so on a given week, we have about 1,500 pounds of tomatoes coming from our greenhouse that we sell at $3 a pound. So if you do the math, it's a big money maker for us on the farm. So again, the take-home message was instead of growing more hoop houses, we just learn how to optimize and grow more in the same amount of space. And I think that's a great approach to become more profitable and productive. In our hoop houses, we grow traced cucumbers. It's the same thing. We learn how to work the plant up and trim them and prune them. And 100-foot row of cucumber gives us 100 cucumbers a week. And that we sell on the cheap for $2.50. So great stuff, We've invested not in equipment and material, we've invested in us, in our skill set. So that's a picture of how we start them. Our cukes, since these tunnels are not heated, we start them 8 weeks before, and we repot them 4 weeks after, so we keep them for 8 weeks in the greenhouse, the heated greenhouse, and then I put clear plastic in the tunnels for a couple of weeks, and that really, really warms it up, warms the soil, and then I transplant plants that are 8 weeks old, and the next week we have cucumbers coming out. So that's how we go around not heating the tunnel. So let's take a break, like 10 minutes, and stretch out. Questions with regards to what we've talked about so far? Yes?
So your tomatoes are in the greenhouse, hoop house.
Yep.
So they don't rotate.
They never rotate. They're grafted. Okay? So there's a rootstock that is resistant to diseases, soil-borne disease, and to another plant that you want. And that's how you can do it for 40 years or 30 years. Like all of the hippies in Quebec in the 80s, they did tomatoes. and they're still doing tomatoes in the soil. Like that's like 25 years. So there's a lot of research that's kind of backing this technique up. And there's no way around rotating tomatoes in heated greenhouses. Because, to heat a greenhouse is expensive. You need a nice greenhouse, you need a nice furnace, you need a good setup, you need a controller actually that measures the temperatures and opens to let go the humidity. So it would be a really high expense to have a lot of these and have low budget, low revenue generating crops. So grafting is kind of the alternative. Okay? So I want to talk just a little bit about soil. Again, I'm not an agronomist, so I'm not going to go in depth with this. This is like my understanding, but it makes a lot of sense. As a grower, we need to think about soil in a new way, okay? Because the way we're, conditioned to look at things is that that's the engine, and what drives the whole thing is usually, in conventional farming, it was the fertilizers. And though the thinking is that, okay, then you're not putting fertilizers, you're putting compost or chicken manure, and that's what's driving the thing. But it's actually not the compost or the chicken manure, it's actually the life form that is processing the organic matter that you're putting into the soil. It's mineralizing it, so it's eating and pooping humus and pooping fertilizers. And if your soil is alive and active, that goes up. That drives the fertility of your soil. So we need to understand soil and fertility not as what I'm supposed to put, but how well your soil is responding to whatever situation he's in. So as a grower, you need to take sure that your balance, your pH and the mineral balance is good. That's what soil tests tell you. Aeration and drainage, because the life form, the earthworms, the fungi, the microorganisms, spiders, whatever, they only operate well in that kind of environment. When the soil is loose, when there's a little bit of air into it, and organic matter, crop rotation, cover crops is how you manage the organic matter content into your soil. Okay? So that's the first thing. I think it's really important. We could talk 2 days about this, but I think that makes a difference. And we have a plan. On our farm when we started, there was an agronomist that was hired, and together we looked at the different crop requirements for all of the crops that we were growing. Plants, they don't have all the same needs with, potassium, phosphorus, and nitrogen. And you need to balance that with what's already in your soil. And you need to supplement what's lacking with compost or with chicken manure. We've used chicken manures for the longest time, combination of both compost and chicken manure for the heavy feeders. And that the reason is, again, coming back to this, there's another factor that drives fertility, it's heat. If the soil is too cold, then these guys aren't operating, and you can put as much compost as you want, it's not going to be, the nutrients aren't available because the life is not active to mineralize it. So in the spring, we use a lot of chicken manure because our soils are too cold. And so that gives a lot of nitrogen to the plant because chicken manure is more soluble. And the plants, they take it up, they take the nitrogen, and then they form their canopy, their leaf structures, because that's why nitrogen is good for that. And then once that's established, then they can go with their roots, and then by then the soil is warmed up and just take whatever they want from what's in it. But this plan, that was for us to take all of the information that's out there about fertilizing organically and put it in a framework that is a guideline to follow that is simple. And that's, I think, is a key factor. And there's some science behind that. You're not just kind of blindly putting compost everywhere. You need to know. Broccolis, there's X amount that they should have, and there's X amount in your soil, and you need to balance that to make sure that you have optimal production. So all of this is in the book again, and that fertilization plan worked for You know, all of the growers that we started with, it was all the same plan and it works really well. And I'm sure it would work just as well here. The drawback to this way of doing things is that we've relied a lot on chicken manure. And you know, that's not chicken manure from free-range chickens. It's just industrial chicken manure. And so now we've kind of moved away from that and we're using a lot more vermicompost and other stuff that kind of mimics what chicken manure can do in the soil. We use a lot of compost on the farm, like 80 tons per acre of compost, which is 40 tons on half of the garden every year. So you remember the field blocks? There was compost every other year, always on the heavy feeders. So that means that I put compost on half of my blocks, 5 blocks every year, and I put 40. I did put 40 tons for the longest time. And the idea there was to build up soil. So the compost that we use is of high quality. I don't make it, I buy it, because I don't know how to make good compost. And you know, I'm learning this now. And when we buy our compost, there's key factors that we're considering. First one is that it comes with an NPK analysis, so we know what we're putting in. It comes, the people that make this compost, they've measured it, they have like a compost turner, they've watered it at the right time, so it comes free of weed seeds, which is critical because you don't want to be putting weed seeds into your garden. You never want to do that. And that's one of the big differences between manure and compost. When you're putting manure into your fields, you are adding millions of seeds to the seed bank of your soil. When you compost it, because it's heated, it kills and burns the weed seeds if it's well made. That is critical. The other thing is that the composting process, what it does is that it takes the nutrients and it transforms it into something that is not so soluble, that will stick together for many years into the soil. So you're creating a food bank of nutrients for your plants. So, one of the common mistakes that I've seen when I was touring around, mentoring farms was that there was a tractor, but it was also they had this whole pile of horse manure that the neighbor was giving to them. And everybody was enchanted about that, except me. It was like, well, you guys, this is an old pile of horse manure. It's not even covered, so it's leached of all of its nutrients anyway, full of weed seeds. And basically, you're just adding organic matter. Might as well add leaves. It would be the same thing. So making compost in an intensive system needs to be really, really well done. It needs to be like prime stuff. And so that's how we spread it. We did 7 wheelbarrows per bed the first few years. And the compost that we buy comes from Fafard. And they're at the peat moss company in Quebec. So like 40% of it is peat moss. So, for building up soil, that's pretty sweet stuff. And I told you guys this, when we started the farm, the organic matter was around 3%. Now it's around 13%. So, there's been something that happened through these years. Yes?
Do you know, just off the top of your head, what percentage of an investment on 55%?
Yeah. We pay $2,000 to get that delivered to the farm.
Is that the 40 tons?
Yeah. Let's say it's $3,000. Okay? But we gross 100,000 per acre. So this is nothing compared to how important it is in the cropping system. You guys have the Vermont Compost Company here. That's pretty cool. Well, that's a great thing. Well, if it's not cheap, it's probably because it's good stuff. And so you're growing good stuff, so you need you need good compost. So that's how you should look at things, I think. If you're just as good or better at doing compost, then fine. But if your compost is of poor quality, then well, that's probably going to equate that you won't have optimal production or quality with your vegetables. Because again, compost is the prime input you have in your system, in an intensive system. Okay?
So do you put the chicken manure on every year on every bed? Or
Before every crop, depending on what the crop was or is, we would put chicken manure
but
with the
is
compost.
every other year?
Yeah. Okay? So every year, like 13 years and counting, that we've done this. This takes about a week to put compost in our beds. There's an intern that tells me, JM, why don't we get a manure spreader to speed up the process? And I'm like, I never thought about that. Great point. And then we go and we visit this whole thing together. I'll say, okay, we'll get a manure spreader. Finding a manure spreader 4 feet center to center is not that obvious, okay? But I have connections. We can make one, for a couple of grand. It's going to be good. Then I have a small tractor. It's like a Ford, 49, these old, and I use it to get the wood out of the woodlot. So this could pull, but I need a loader. Frankly, if this is going to be efficient, I need a loader. And so I'm going to buy an old tractor with a loader for a couple of grand. And I bet you my shirt that when it's time to do this, one of the engine is going to break or something's going to break. And I'm going to spend a couple of days fixing this, running, rummaging, looking for parts, while you could be doing it faster. And that's the logic that we're in. Like, we think that shovels and wheelbarrows is a backward way of doing things, but for the small farms, it's still appropriate technology. It's reliable and it's efficient in a way. Spreading manure all over the garden and then planting and you're fertilizing your aisles. That's crazy. That's crazy. In the name of doing this efficiently. Like, on a big farm, there's no other way around that. But on a small farm, I'm not sure. I'm not convinced. So this is how we've done it. And, there's probably ways to speed this up. But, the approach that I would have would be to call my neighbor. He's 15. He's a hockey stud. He eats like 16 meals a day. And I'm just going to time him and give him the challenge to do this twice as fast as these other guys. And then I could even tell him, next year, we'll measure this year, and next year you come back and we'll try to make it faster. And he would like that challenge. That would be like burning his carbohydrates, and he would be like training. And so, we should look at other alternatives to speed up the process than just relying on mechanics. Okay? So we make sure that the top layer is mixed in the soil so that we don't lose the nitrogen there. And that's the harrow. I'll talk about that later on. So always cover the compost pile. This is like 101. Because otherwise, if it's not covered, you're leaching all your nutrients down the drain. So compost pile is covered. And, I know that I don't know how to make compost. I know that because every year I make compost. And this is what I get. Like something that is like, whatever it is, I don't really know what it is. Because I'm not measuring, I'm not watering, I'm not turning in at the right time. I'm just piling everything and then I'm covering for the winter. And so this could be changed on my farm. Perhaps I will this year. Learn how to make compost.
Can I ask you a question on your compost?
Yes.
So I went to another talk and they said the first place they check when you have some disease is the cold compost pile. That's what we have also.
Mm-hmm.
Do you worry about that with the...
Well, in a good compost, it's filled with microbial life, like filled. So when you're putting compost into your soil, you're inoculating your soil with microbial life. It's positive. So I don't know why these guys say that.
So cold
Yeah, but cold compost is, you know, I get my compost delivered hot in the spring, and I put hot compost into my cold beds. But even like the compost that's been lying around for 6 months, because certain blocks I put compost later on, it's covered, and I'm sure it's still filled with good, you know, I would challenge that belief.
This pile, your crop residue pile.
Oh, well, this, I wouldn't think that this is good.
No, I mean, are you worried about it having, you know, disease?
No, because it's still turning, and I'm inoculating it with effective microorganisms.
And how do you turn your?
Well, I ask my neighbor to come once a year with his loader, and then he always laughs. Ha ha ha. He knows that I'm, you know, I make these conferences talk about no tractors, and he's all right, so this is a picture of a soil profile that was taken 3 years ago when all the French agronomists were coming down trying to corner us. I hired an agronomist to kind of like keep the dialogue friendly, and it was crazy. We did a soil profile, and on about 12-inch there was just one layer of good black earth. It's just like really impressive stuff. That's because we are not turning the soil. We're not rototilling, we're not plowing, we're just gently working the soil. Surface cultivation. And because we're relying on these guys a lot more than we used to. Okay? Earthworms are the future of farming. Okay? Because these guys, under giving the right conditions, the right habitat, what are they doing? They're coming up and down, up and down, up and down. They're taking the organic matter that you leave, bringing it down into the soil, pooping humus, building up the soil structure. And then you go with a plow, you wipe everything out. You go with a rototiller, you flip their whole life upside down. You double dig, they go crazy. They're like, okay, dudes, we're going to leave. This is not what we want. And, you know, I got interested in earthworms because at McGill, when I was studying, we were studying disasters, but also ecological services, looking how to replace, you know, water treatment facilities with, you know, natural systems that would do the same without having human intervention. And the earthworm, I see it like that. Like, we should harness the power of the earthworm and replace mechanical tillage with biological tillage. And so I've had these ideas in my head ever since we've started, and we're kind of like, all the tools that we're using on the farm, we want to make them as gentle possible so that these guys are not kind of neglected. The broad fork. The broad fork was designed with the earthworm in mind. And it, you know, it's you plant it into the soil, you open up the soil without turning it. So you're not inverting the layers. So you're not, you know, messing around with the structure and the integrity of your soil. You're not bringing weed seeds from the bottom up, but you're still adding air and opening up the soil, making sure that it's really not compact and really loose. So the broad fork is like, that's why we call our farm the grelinette, which is French for broad fork. It's really emblematic of working in an ecological way. Yes?
We used a broad fork for the first time in our house. We did all our beds old-fashioned way and did the broad forking, and we saw this huge, amazing difference in the soil health and agriculture.
Yeah, it's a guaranteed, because again, you're bringing air into the soil and you're not turning everything down. So, but the broad fork alone, it needs to be completed with other stuff. Okay, so the broad fork, and you know, people argue with me, and perhaps they have the right to do it, that the broad fork, you know, on an acre and a half, on a commercial market garden or a commercial small farm is just not efficient enough. For time being, I haven't found another tool that does that kind of work, like this deep tillage without turning the soil. And so I still think it's the go-to tools for permanent beds. And by the way, the fact that the beds are permanent by default, you're not compacting your soil. So it's like that's the head start. Because you're doing permanent beds, you have loose soil already. And then you're adding layers. And then, but when you're planting certain, specialty crops that have deep roots, you're using the broad fork just to make sure that it's wide open and they can really shoot down.